On the night of October 29th, 2023, in a quiet village just outside Cambridge, England, a woman was strangled to death in her own bedroom by the man who had shared her bed for nearly 30 years. No forced entry, no stranger, no random act of violence. Just a husband, a life insurance policy worth £450,000, and a web of lies so deep that the man who told them had started to believe he could get away with anything, even murder. Her name was Sian Hammond, and from the outside her life looked like everything most people spend their whole lives trying to build. A successful marriage, 2 daughters, properties, businesses, a home in a pretty English village where everyone knew your name. But inside that picture-perfect life, something had gone terribly wrong. And Sian, the biochemist, the businesswoman, the mother, the woman her family called one of the friendliest people they had ever met, would never get the chance to find out just how bad it really was. This is her story. Love true crime? The Ultimate Serial Killer colouring book features 65 notorious killers brought to life in bold black and white line art. Single-sided pages dark, detailed, unforgettable. Available now on Amazon. Sian Llewellyn was born in November 1976. Growing up in Wales, it was clear from an early age that she was exceptional. The kind of student who does not just pass exams but genuinely understands things. She earned a BSc honours degree in biochemistry, a field that demands real precision and intellectual rigour. After graduating, she built a career as a research scientist. That is not a path everyone can walk. It requires years of focused, disciplined work on problems most of the world will never see. Sian could do it, and she did. She also had Robert. Robert James Hammond, known locally as James, had a very different background. He grew up partly in Saudi Arabia, returned to Wales, left school at 16 with few qualifications, and by his own admission did not enjoy the academic route. He worked in his family market stall business, then in a furniture shop before finding his way into financial services as a trainee advisor. It turned out he was genuinely gifted at it. He was persuasive, charming, socially fluent. The kind of person who walks into a room and within minutes makes people feel understood. Sian and Robert married when they were both just 18 years old. 2 teenagers who had found each other, starting a life together before most people have finished deciding who they even are. They moved to Cambridge. Robert said later in a professional profile that Cambridge would look good on Sian's CV, that the move was partly shaped by her ambitions, her future. In Cambridge, they settled in Histon, a village just north of the city, a good English place with a strong sense of community, where people know their neighbours and children grow up in the same schools their friends use. They had 2 daughters. Sian made a choice many capable women make. She stepped away from her scientific career to focus on raising the girls. It was not the end of her professional story. When the children were older, she re-entered the working world as a financial and mortgage advisor specialist, joining the family businesses. Companies House records list her as director, company secretary, and person with significant control across several business entities from 2007. A 2011 company update described the Histon administration unit as being run by Sian Hammond. She was not a name on a letterhead. She was the person who made things actually work. The life they built from the outside looked impressive. Multiple properties, a busy social calendar, frequent holidays. Their daughters supported in their sporting achievements. Robert had built a strong professional reputation as a local mortgage broker, with a near-perfect client rating on review platforms. They were, to every observer, a success story, the young couple who moved to Cambridge and made it work. And Sian herself, by every account someone you would genuinely want in your life. Her family described her as one of the friendliest people you could ever meet. The sentencing judge, Mr. Justice Kavanaugh, described her as kind, bubbly, very friendly, devoted to her daughters, proud of them, keen on fitness, and hard-working. She had recently taken up running and completed her first 10K race. No small achievement for someone who also ran a business and a household. She was the person who showed up, who remembered things about people, who made others feel seen. In October 2023, Sian Hammond had no idea that the life she had helped build was standing on crumbling ground. No idea that the man who slept beside her was drowning in debt and lies. No idea that, in the mind of the person she trusted most, she had already been identified as the solution. Here is what Sian did not know. By 2023, Robert Hammond's finances were in freefall. He owed more than £300,000 in total, over $190,000 to Legal and General, around $80,000 to HMRC, debts to a short-term capital funding company, and outstanding bounce-back loans. That is a catastrophic level of financial exposure. And Robert had been hiding it, not just from the outside world, but from Sian. The judge later found that Sian did not have a clear picture of the true financial situation, because Robert had dealt directly with creditors himself, and because the family used a complicated web of bank accounts that made it hard for Sian to see the full picture. The court explicitly rejected Robert's claim that Sian knew about the debts and had agreed with his approach. The judge found it inconceivable that she would have agreed, because what Robert was doing was deliberate, sustained fraud. Through 2023, Robert told Legal and General and HMRC that he had cancer, that he had suffered a mental breakdown, that he had relapsed, that he and Sian were going through a divorce, that Sian herself was unwell and or in hospital. Every single statement was false. The judge called him a habitual and accomplished liar who lied whenever it suited his purpose, and through 2023 it suited his purpose constantly. There was a way out that did not involve murder. The Hammonds had equity in their jointly owned properties. If some had been sold, the debts could have been cleared. Their situation was not beyond saving. But selling properties meant admitting the truth. It meant telling Sian what had really been happening. It meant losing the portfolio, the image, the life he'd constructed from nothing over 30 years. It meant becoming the man who had failed. The boy who left school at 16 with barely a qualification to his name, who had built something and then watched it collapse. That humiliation, to a man like Robert Hammond, was apparently unthinkable, and so he began to think about another way out. Sian held a life insurance policy worth £450,000. On October the 25th, 2023, 4 days before Sian's death, Robert Hammond paid the arrears on her life insurance policy, bringing it fully up to date. If Sian died, he stood to receive £450,000, enough to clear every debt, enough to keep the properties, enough to preserve the image of a life that was already in ruins underneath. The judge would later say it was inconceivable that Robert did not have that payout in mind. On Thursday, October 26th, Robert opened his laptop and searched for information about how much diazepam would constitute a lethal overdose. He knew that Sian sometimes took diazepam to manage anxiety. He also knew she would be anxious that particular weekend. One of their daughters was flying home from Switzerland, and Sian always worried when the girls travelled. He was already thinking concretely about how to kill his wife. Then on Sunday, October 29th, the day Sian would die, he made another search. He looked up how to disconnect the passenger airbag in a Ford Focus of a specific age. One of the family cars matched that description exactly. Sian sometimes rode in the passenger seat while Robert drove. The judge concluded from these two searches that Robert was actively considering multiple methods of killing his wife: a staged overdose, a car crash, engineered to look like an accident, before the final, brutal reality of what he actually did. The weekend itself, on the surface, looked completely ordinary. Saturday night they went out for dinner with friends, a couple at a table, laughing, making conversation, doing what couples do. Sunday they took a car to the garage for repairs. They ate together, they spent time in their home gym, they watched television in the evening, and later that night they had sexual intercourse. That contrast is one of the most disturbing aspects of this case. Because while Sian was doing the ordinary, comfortable thing she'd done 1,000 times in her marriage, while she was simply living her life, Robert Hammond was, at some level, already waiting, already decided, already counting days toward a payout. Late on the night of October 29th, 2023, in the bedroom of their home in Primes Corner, Histon, Robert Hammond wrapped his bare hands around his wife's throat and strangled her. The forensic evidence showed sustained compression of her neck. The judge said it likely lasted a minute or more. That is an extraordinarily long time. Long enough for Sian to understand what was happening to her. Long enough to fight back, and she did fight back. The forensic record documented defensive injuries on her face and arms, gripping injuries on her arms, and trauma to the back of her head. Sian Hammond did not go quietly. She struggled, she resisted, she used everything she had. She did not survive. Robert was wearing his Whoop fitness tracker, a wrist-based device that monitors heart rate and physical activity continuously. The device recorded approximately 20 minutes of elevated heart rate activity around the time Sian died. The prosecution argued that while some of that elevation corresponded to sexual intercourse earlier in the evening, a significant portion occurred during the strangulation itself. The judge accepted that interpretation. And then the device went dark. It stopped recording. Prosecutors suggested it had been removed from his wrist after the killing. Robert went downstairs. He waited. Just before 2 a.m. on October 30th, 2023, he called 999. He told the dispatcher he had found his wife face down on the bed, not breathing. He said he had last seen her alive and well roughly 30 minutes earlier. When the dispatcher instructed him to perform CPR, Robert gave every impression of complying. He was not complying. The judge later found that Robert did not attempt CPR at any point, and that his performance of doing so was a deliberate act, staged for the emergency dispatcher to establish the image of a desperate, panicking husband who had just found his wife dying. A paramedic who attended the scene subsequently formed the view that no CPR had been attempted at all. Emergency responders arrived. Air ambulance Dr. Ebilius Wong attended. Emergency care assistant Carl Clifton reported there were never any signs of life. At 2:35 a.m. on October 30th, 2023, Sian Hammond was pronounced dead. She was 46 years old. PC Richard Jenkins arrived at the Hammond home at 4:18 a.m. He noticed bruising and marks on Sian's body. He noticed a broken picture frame at the top of the stairs. He noted that Robert was vague about timings, saying he had left Sian upstairs around midnight, then found her hours later. Something was wrong. At first, the circumstances were not being treated as obvious murder, but pathology changed everything. The post-mortem examination established that Sian had not died naturally. She had been strangled, and from that point the investigation transformed entirely. Home CCTV footage was reviewed. No one had entered or left the house during the night. No third party, no forced entry, no evidence of anyone else. Only Robert. Investigators then built a case from multiple directions simultaneously. Financial records, phone and computer evidence, browser search histories, fitness tracker data, house alarm logs, and communications with Legal and General and HMRC. The full scale of Robert's debt surfaced. The elaborate lies he had told to creditors were documented. The life insurance arrears payment, 4 days before Sian died, became a centerpiece of the prosecution case, and then the searches, diazepam overdose on October 26th, Ford Focus airbag on October 29th. In the days after Sian's death, while her body was barely cold, Robert was already in contact with Legal and General. He asked whether he could receive a reduction in interest on his debt if he paid it off quickly, using the life insurance payout. Prosecutor Christopher Paxton, KC, told the court Robert had his eyes firmly on the prize. Robert Hammond was arrested on November 10th, 2023 and charged with murder. At trial, his defense raised natural causes, cardiac events, epilepsy, seizure-related explanations. The judge disposed of everyone with a single devastating sentence. There was not a shred of evidence of any natural cause or natural contributory factor. On July 17th, 2024, the jury at Cambridge Crown Court returned their verdict after deliberation. Guilty of murder, unanimous. On July 23, 2024, Mr. Justice Kavanagh sentenced Robert James Hammond to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years, minus the time already served on remand. After that minimum, the parole board would decide whether he could ever be released. Detective Inspector Richard Stott described him publicly as a competent liar, driven by greed and a fear of losing the public standing he had spent decades constructing. Technical analysis. This case is a clear illustration of how modern digital forensics and financial investigation work together to build an airtight prosecution. Pathology opened the door. Without the post-mortem finding of a manual strangulation, this could easily have been recorded as a natural death. Dr. Fitzpatrick Swallow's examination identified the cause of death, documented the defensive wounds, and explicitly rejected every natural alternative the defense proposed. Her evidence was the foundation everything else was built on. The Whoop fitness tracker became a central exhibit. Wearable devices record physiological data continuously and passively. The wearer cannot selectively pause or delete readings in real time. The 20-minute window of elevated heart rate activity placed Robert in a state of sustained physical exertion at the exact time Cian died. And the device going dark shortly after, removed, according to the prosecution, created a gap in data that became evidence in itself. This is an increasingly important category in domestic homicide. The perpetrator's own body, recorded by their own technology, providing testimony against them. Home CCTV provided the crucial negative proof. No one entered the house, no one left. The footage does not place Robert at the scene. It eliminates everyone else from consideration entirely, and browser history on a personal laptop remains one of the most reliably damning categories of digital evidence available to prosecutors. The diazepam search on October 26th and the airbag search on October 29th were not encrypted or deleted. Robert apparently assumed he would not be investigated. Finally, the financial investigation built the motive in granular, documented detail. Multiple bank accounts, HMRC correspondence, legal and general records, short-term loan paperwork, all of it assembled into a timeline. The arrears payment 4 days before the murder. The post-death inquiry about using the payout to clear debts. Each data point individually is suggestive. Together, they form a sequence that is nearly impossible to explain innocently. The lesson this case offers investigators, and should offer anyone who overestimates their own privacy, is blunt. People who believe they are being private are leaving trails everywhere. In their fitness devices, their browsers, their bank accounts, and their own front door cameras. Psychological analysis. Robert Hammond had no history of violence, no previous convictions, no documented pattern of aggression. Friends, colleagues, and clients spoke well of him. This was not a man with a visible criminal trajectory, which is precisely what makes the psychology of this case worth examining carefully. The court record suggests someone for whom the external presentation of success had become central to his sense of self. He had come from modest beginnings, left school at 16, worked market stalls, built a career through persuasion and persistence. Over time, he constructed a professional identity that commanded genuine respect, and the evidence indicates that protecting that identity became, progressively, more important than truth, more important than his marriage, ultimately more important than another person's right to live. Psychologists describe a phenomenon sometimes called face-saving violence, where the threat being responded to is not physical but social. The exposure Robert faced would not have harmed his body. It would have dismantled his image, and when a person's constructed identity feels existential, when the collapse of the facade feels indistinguishable from the collapse of the self, extreme responses can follow. The lies he constructed through 2023 are also revealing. These were not small or impulsive deceptions. They were elaborate, layered, and required ongoing active maintenance. Cancer diagnoses invented from nothing. Divorces fabricated. Cian's hospitalization invented for creditors. The judge called him habitual and accomplished. That is not a skill a person develops overnight. It is practiced over years, refined through repeated successful use. The insurance arrears payment 4 days before the murder tells us something chilling. By October 25th, Robert had made a decision at some level. Not yet the night, not yet the exact method, but the outcome. He had already committed to it. And the fake CPR, performed calmly for an emergency dispatcher within minutes of strangling his wife, speaks to a capacity for rapid compartmentalization, for switching between emotional registers almost instantaneously, that goes well beyond ordinary self-control. This was not a man who snapped under pressure. This was a man who calculated, who researched, who waited for the right moment, and who then performed grief on the phone while his wife's body was still warm upstairs. The people left behind. There is a dimension of this case I want to sit with for a moment, because it rarely receives the attention it deserves in true crime coverage. Robert Hammond did not just murder a wife, he murdered a mother, and his daughters are now living with something almost incomprehensible. They lost Cian violently, suddenly in the most intimate possible betrayal. Killed in the home they grew up in by their father, and then they had to watch him stand trial, and then they wrote letters to the court in his support. Those letters are not evidence of poor judgment. They are evidence of an impossible human position. When you love someone, the truth about them does not automatically erase that love. Grief and loyalty can coexist with devastating knowledge. Those daughters are simultaneously mourning the mother who was taken from them, and the father they thought they had. Both losses, tangled together, with no clean way to separate them. Cian's own mother and sister also wrote to the court asking for leniency, despite having lost Cian. These are people trying, in the most human way possible, to hold the remaining pieces of a shattered family together. Their letters do not indicate forgiveness or denial. They indicate the impossible arithmetic of love in the aftermath of something unforgivable. Robert Hammond took one life on the night of October 29th. But the damage radiates outward, to daughters who will carry this forever, to a mother who outlived her child, to friends who sat across a dinner table from them the night before it happened, and it does not stop radiating. Cian Hammond completed her first 10K run. She had a degree in biochemistry, and a warmth no qualification can teach. She was, by every account, exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. The kind whose absence leaves a specific, irreplaceable shape in the lives of everyone who knew her. She deserved so much more than what happened to her in that bedroom, and the people who loved her deserved to carry her memory forward, not as a statistic, not as a case study, but as a real person who was intelligent and warm and full of life, and who was taken far too soon. If this story moved you, please subscribe. It helps this channel keep telling these stories with the depth and care that real victims deserve. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. Share this with someone who should know Cian Hammond's name. She was not just a victim, she was a person, and she deserved better. I will see you in the next one.